As you can see, I'm Esther Abels. I'm the Chief Clinical Regulatory Officer within Visiopharm. And today I would like to start with this federal notice. On January 15, the US Department of Health and Human Services published a notice and request for information proposing to exempt 91 medical devices from the FDA's 510K notification requirements. This notice says this review concluded that 510K pre-market notification is unnecessary for several categories of products, including AI, artificial intelligence imaging devices, due to the infrequency of reports of adverse events. Yet, several medical devices listed in the notice have only begun to be sold in the past few years. Then on January 20th, the Biden administration issued a regulatory freeze pending review memorandum, and the new presidential administration would need to approve this policy for it to take effect. What is interesting here is that the notice was published at similar time when new AI device regulation action plan by the FDA was published. And this plan specifically called for the creation of an expanded regulatory framework for machine learning devices and for more careful review of products that rely on AI. Why I mention this notice is because this notice is seeking comments on whether pre-market review should be permanently waived for those devices, and more broadly, on ways to improve the 510K pre-market notification program. And I believe commenting is an opportunity. Can be regarded as a public venue to publicly state what we want to see in digital pathology. And that's what I would like to discuss today. I would like to discuss the different entities and viewpoints regarding regulations and reimbursement in USA. I would like to discuss this because I believe making things public and discussing different viewpoints provide a better understanding, and that will provide trust and confidence about the safe and effective use of the devices to drive this field forward. Why do I believe a better understanding would move it forward? Only if we understand each other's thinkings and needs, we can truly help each other. It is critical to understand what regulations say, why they say it, what is it that they're trying to achieve. If you understand that, it can add value. How will I discuss this today? Well, I will address what drives the regulatory pathway, how barriers delaying adoption of clinical use of digital pathology could be overcome, and what the current regulatory and reimbursement landscape in the digital pathology field is. The regulation of medical devices throughout the entire world is a vast and rapidly evolving field. Although the regulatory paths and registration processes to bring and maintain medical devices to the clinical market vary country to country, they have common elements to the registration process, which include safety of the device. All regulatory processes are put in place to protect the patient. We all are aware that obtaining registration to legally market a medical device is expensive and time-consuming. For example, when I was reviewing the searchable 510K database from the FDA, one could calculate it can take approximately 8 to 13 months from submission to clearance for pathology devices, which excludes the pre-submission and design and development phase. Often it is being said that this will hamper access to innovation. And as Dirk mentioned previously, there is so much innovation in pathology that will have a positive impact on patient care and personalized medicine, which we don't want to withhold from patients. Patients deserve to have access to these devices. Often, the lack of regulatory authorizations are being viewed as one of the greatest barriers to adoption. And as I stated at other conferences, I disagree. It's more than that. The global community must come together to understand the true barriers and solve the problems using regulatory science, of which the regulatory pathway is one of the elements. We have a need for clear, efficient regulatory pathways for digital pathology. For example, we need to get access to general principles to develop and design algorithms based on AI. This calls for a collaborative approach with FDA for each vendor. Moreover, this calls for a collective, collaborative community with representatives from different entities, including an all relevant stakeholders approach. Let's first discuss how a medical device is being defined. It's defined by its intended use, technology, and geography. This will define the regulatory path, and in general, most countries follow a risk-based approach. That is, how much risk does a device impose to a patient? The lowest risk class devices require less rigorous pre-market approval dossiers, compared to highest risk class devices. In addition, different regulations can influence the composition of a device. Specifically, a device can interoperate with another medical or a non-medical device. For example, interoperating devices in Europe could be considered separate medical devices that exchange information with each other, or subsystems that can be regarded as a closed system, for example, one device. In the USA, the FDA guidance, the Technical Performance Assessment, describes a whole slide imaging system as two subsystems. One is the image acquisition and two is the image display. This is not new to most of us, yet it's relevant to realize this once more. Why? Well, because this approach of this imaging chain is also being followed for algorithms. One can understand when the input differs, for example, the resolution or the compression level, that the algorithm could provide different outputs. This is asking for interoperability. That is not a closed device where the image pathway is the only driving factor for regulatory requirements. In radiology, for example, acquisition devices, viewing devices, as well as algorithms are considered separate devices. That's also what we need to accomplish in digital pathology to move this field forward. So how can we move this regulatory path forward? Regulatory paths are defined by different needs and different economic drivers. These are inputs to the assessment of the benefit-risk ratio, a key element for medical devices, although economies should not influence the decision-making. Based on the different needs, we can safely conclude that it does play a role in risk assessment. For example, in rural underserved areas, patients are at risk of not being diagnosed in time. Digital pathology has the potential to reduce this risk and shifts the balance to benefits. Such shifts in the risk analysis also influences payer strategy, and more about that a little bit later. The ultimate financial driver, which is directly linked to many stakeholders, such as pathology associations, healthcare administrations, patients, and so on. This highlights that digital pathology will benefit from collaborations between all these stakeholders. It's also good to realize that authorities make regulations, but not always have the operational understanding of how the regulations impact day-to-day routines. Regulators and government authorities need the community, key stakeholders, to demonstrate clinical utility and that the medical device is safe. Therefore, we will benefit from consensus standards, harmonization, and collaborations. So what are the differences between these three, and how do we optimally leverage each one of them? A standard is a document that provides for common and repeated use, rules, guidelines for activities. When complying to the FDA-recognized standards, it makes the device development as well as the assessment for safety and effectiveness by an authority more efficient. Harmonization is the process of minimizing redundant or conflicting standards which may have evolved independently. The name is an analogy to the process to harmonizing discordant music. It's needed to make sure we all speak the same language and to unify regulations as much as possible. This facilitates communication and creates a mutual understanding between vendors and regulators. It's providing clarity and could ultimately shorten time of bringing devices to market. Collaborations are an efficient way to receive inputs. Examples of such collaborations in digital pathology are the Digital Pathology Association and the Pathology Innovation Collaborative Community, which was formerly known as the Alliance for Digital Pathology. Collaborative communities bring together key stakeholders to achieve common outcomes, solve shared challenges, and leverage collective opportunities. This can be done through research, publications, tapping into experts in the field or adjacent fields, all while feeding this valuable input back to authorities that need this context to make fair and reasonable assessments, as well as regulations to the safe and effective use of the device. Collaboration is a win-win for all stakeholders. Together we become informed to increase awareness and understanding, drive synergy, advance best practices, and can make expert judgments on devices. What is then the current regulatory AI landscape? As mentioned before, it all comes from the perspective of risks. We can draw a parallel to radiology and build upon its experience. But we also must understand that the current regulatory landscape in radiology has greatly evolved over the last 20 years. Step by step, they gained more knowledge and could eliminate risks. When we take a closer look at that timeline, devices evolved from one highest risk class device to moderate risk class interoperable devices, that is breaking up the pixel pathway. They used the experience and gained knowledge to better understand clinical utility and further define how to mitigate risks. And that's where we need to be in digital pathology. Addressing this for fully automated and/or continuous learning algorithms. Well, there's not a fully automated or continuous learning algorithm cleared by the FDA today. We could get there by collecting real-world data, RWD, that can prove clinical utility and demonstrate that the data can be used for continuous learning. Yet RWD is not always regarded as being reliable and accurate. For example, there was a veteran affairs pathologist under Kansas who was under influence and misdiagnosed thousands of patients. If an AI algorithm is adapting to such a pathologist, it could influence the performance of the algorithm. Usually, a small population of outliers will not really influence the performance of the algorithm. Nevertheless, one could mitigate this risk by building in alarms that can detect drifts or deviations from normal. Meaning, this all boils down to the question, how do you create a control and report back that when an AI learns, what was true initially is still true? So we should consider the risks that could impact the pixel pathway. Define upfront what aspects you intend to change through learning and how the algorithm will learn and change while we remain safe and effective. This creates extra knowledge and increases familiarity about device performance methods. The leverage of regulations could open doors for interoperability. So in conclusion for this regulatory path, it's clear that digital health and related innovation provides clear advantages for patients. Even though the current regulatory landscape for AI devices has not been fully clarified, collaborative communities, including vendors, are using all measures for designing and developing quality devices. Design controls provide a tested and successful method to keep the development effort focused. They're an extremely effective tool in ensuring that aspects of the device that could result in harm to the patient or the user are identified as early as possible, so they can be eliminated, guarded against, or at least weighted against the clinical benefit the device will provide. Also, general principles applied in radiology can be used in digital pathology and drive the path to bring robust digital pathology devices to the clinical market in order patients will have timely access to precision pathology. And herewith I would like to restate that a better understanding of regulations will provide trust and confidence about the safe and effectiveness of the devices and drive this field forward.